Aqua, Book 1, In the Shadow of Treachery and Liberty. At school, we were taught that our history once took place above the water's surface. A long time ago, humanity lived on the Earth's surface, under the open sky, illuminated by the sun, the moon, and the stars. But they also told us about the wars, endless wars that ravaged the Earth. Weapons were developed beyond all reason, and the dream of peace became nothing more than a legend, a mockery in history books. By the end of the 21st century, the inevitable happened. The final battle for the Earth's dwindling resources had begun, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed everything. A flood of nuclear fire and radioactive ash suffocated the world. It was clear who would win. No one. The surface of the Earth died. A massive cloud of ash covered the planet, darkening the sky and spreading deadly radiation across continents. A dreadful silence fell over the world, broken only by the relentless, soundless dying. Plants, animals, humans, everything vanished. The last survivors, those who managed to escape the horror, sought refuge in the depths of the ocean. The underwater stations, once built to extract resources from the ocean floor, became humanity's final strongholds. There, hidden from the deadly breath of the surface, a new era began. But the cost was high. An entire generation vanished into darkness, wiped out by the destruction of their homeland. The Earth was dead, but humanity refused to die with it. The deep-sea stations turned into settlements, and from them grew cities, sprouting like glowing underwater mushrooms along the ocean's trenches. Resources were extracted from the ocean floor in vast quantities. Oxygen was produced from endless fields of algae farms near the surface, and food was harvested from the abyss, cultivated in artificial habitats. A new age of science and technology dawned. Hermetically sealed underwater domes became the only safe havens. Brilliant engineers and visionary scientists created a world that functioned, a new ecosystem designed to ensure humanity's survival. But humanity remained true to itself. It didn't take long for the glowing cities clinging to the deep-sea cliffs to develop powerful trade networks. Transport companies pushed the global exchange of resources and labor forward, and it seemed as if mankind had learned from its mistakes. But in the depths of the ocean, new rivalries began to form. New powers rose. Cultural divisions grew like cracks in metal. English was the universal language, spoken by everyone. In the West Pacific, Russian and Japanese were also common, while Arabic dominated the Indian Ocean. The sea was humanity's last hope, and at the same time, a new playground for its darkest instincts. Here, in the endless darkness, in the unfathomable depths of the oceans, mankind rose once more to new life, life in a dead world. This was our creation, and we named it Aqua. The years of stagnation were finally over. Our lives were now dictated by gigantic submarines, massive freighters, heavy mining crawlers, and the harsh glare of cold neon lights. Without the blue glow of the lamps, Aqua would be nothing more than a deep, impenetrable darkness, a black abyss waiting to consume us. The distances between inhabited regions were enormous. Only specially equipped submarines could navigate the vast, freezing, and merciless depths. No one dared to think about the surface anymore. After more than 500 years, the Earth, as it once was, had become nothing more than a legend. The only reminder of the mainland were overpriced surface simulations in cinemas, showing green forests, azure skies, clouds pierced by mountains, and sunlight. But they were nothing more than illusions. The truth was merciless. Approaching the water's surface was a death sentence. We knew only darkness and the constant claustrophobic embrace of an ocean that forgave nothing. In this abyss, halogen lamps provided us with guidance and protection. They illuminated the cold, flawless titanium corridors of the underwater stations, which stretched through them like veins. The cities themselves were anchored to the seabed with massive chains, holding them in place as if to prevent the strong currents from tearing them away. The buildings reached up to 200 meters high, titanium-clad giants, defying and resisting the strongest tides. They formed the beating hearts of our cities, centers of life that were never meant to exist underwater. And yet, humanity, having driven itself to the brink of extinction, now living in an endless night, had stubbornly adapted. Travel, music, film, art, and even alcohol consumption were still among our passions, and there was one more passion we managed to revive: war. My name is Emerald Deadeye Flint, and I am a mercenary. The nickname Deadeye comes from my reputation. Though my marksmanship is legendary, they call me Deadeye for a different reason. No one has ever lived to tell the tale of a fight against me. Because of that, my friendships are limited, but that doesn't bother me. In Aqua, I am known, feared by some, but always respected. I have what others can only dream of. My freedom was hard-earned. My job takes me to the farthest reaches of this world. My contracts lead me through the massive forge halls of the Atlantic Federation, deep into the dark cave systems of the anarchists in the Tornado Zone, into the lavish and playful bars of the Clans Union, and even into the monarchist shogunate, where I have made myself very unpopular. But no matter where my missions take me, one thing remains the same. I work only for myself. There is no loyalty, no code of honor, only the question of who is willing to pay the most. For me, ideals and morals never decided who was good or evil. It was always the money that made the difference. I was free, free to do whatever I wanted, free to take on any challenge. In Aqua, this merciless, endless deep sea, freedom means everything. From boy to mercenary. I grew up as the son of a whore and an unknown father in the stations of Galapagos, the dirtiest and smallest of the 4 largest cities in Aqua. Galapagos lay in the heart of the Tornado Zone, a region ruled by violence and chaos, stretching from the west coast of South America to the Hawaiian archipelagos. There was no room for weakness here, no space for hesitation, and no time for mercy. Most people avoided the Tornado Zone if they could afford to, but I had no choice. For me, this place wasn't just a backdrop, it was home. The warlords ruled the Tornado Zone. They were wealthy businessmen who thrived off the backs of others, leeching from those beneath them. They were the powerful rulers of a lawless land, sustained only by their strength and the fear they instilled. They divided the zone into territories, each with its own rules, or rather, the absence of rules. Conflict was a daily occurrence, and yet, despite all the horrors, the Tornado Zone was also a center of trade. Merchants from all over the world came here to make deals that would have been impossible anywhere else in Aqua. And me? I was just a boy trying to find my place in this madness. My mother, a prostitute, did everything she could to keep us afloat. She was one of many working in Galapagos's red light district, one of the few places where credits always flowed. Credits were the only currency that mattered in Aqua. Without them, you were nothing. After paying for our tiny apartment in the housing blocks, food and drinking water, there was barely anything left. I still remember sitting at the docks as a child, watching the massive freighters and submarines arriving. These steel giants were symbols of a world I couldn't yet understand, a world of adventure that seemed forever out of reach. The machines had a kind of magic on them.
Their humming echoed through the narrow tunnels of the stations, and I could spend hours watching the crew work. It was like a theater performance staged just for me. But in school, if you could even call it that, I was far from an ideal student. Learning just wasn't my thing. Instead, I was a troublemaker with a sharp tongue, bold but quick-witted.
I had a talent for driving both teachers and classmates insane, and sometimes it got me into trouble. But honestly, I didn't care. School meant nothing to me. What mattered was life out there, on the docks, in the dimly lit bars, and in the grimy corridors of Galapagos. Still, I wasn't stupid. People who knew me well understood that. I could think fast, make plans, and I had a way with words, both entertaining and dangerous. Sometimes it helped me talk my way out of trouble. Other times, it got me into even more. My childhood was tough, but I survived. I never felt ashamed of my mother or what she had to do to keep us afloat. That was just life in the tornado zone. Here, it was all about survival, and I knew she was doing the best she could. What she taught me was priceless. Never show weakness and never give up. Galapagos shaped me. The narrow, filthy alleyways, the neon lights, the constant hum of the machines, and the dangers lurking around every corner. Maybe it made me into what I am today, because in the tornado zone, I learned one thing early on. In Aqua, there are no heroes, only survivors, and I had no intention of dying as a victim. By the time I was 9, I was already a child of the tornado zone, bold, fearless, and always curious. The days in Galapagos often felt endless and dull, especially when I spent too much time at the docks watching the massive freighters and submarines come and go. They carried supplies, machinery, and sometimes massive containers whose contents remained a mystery, moving between the stations. To me, they were gateways to another world, one I painted in my imagination. A world where adventure, wealth, and freedom were waiting for me. A world that had everything Galapagos didn't. One afternoon, as a mighty freighter was being loaded, a wild thought took hold of me. Why should I keep watching from a distance? Why not take a chance, dive into an adventure, and see more than just Galapagos? So I waited until the dock workers were distracted and slipped aboard. The massive cargo crates offered plenty of hiding spots to remain undetected. It was easy to crouch between the containers, and I felt a nervous thrill in my stomach as I moved deeper into the ship. Suddenly, the cargo hold went dark. The loading hatches sealed shut, and the freighter's engines rumbled to life, a deep, distant hum vibrating through the metal walls. It was exhilarating. The thought of leaving Galapagos, even if only for a day, made me forget everything else. Maybe it was the promise of something new, something bigger than my tiny world. But the journey wasn't as glamorous as I had imagined. The ship was stuffy and loud, and the metallic creaking made me flinch every time. I crouched between the supply crates, hidden in the darkness, trying to suppress my excitement. After a few hours, the freighter docked at another station. My plan? I didn't have one. I just wanted to explore, to experience something. But my curiosity became my downfall. The workers discovered me among their cargo as massive cranes unloaded the ship. The zone police officers, clad in their heavy uniforms, looked at me like an annoying insect they wanted to crush. The zone police weren't known for their leniency in the tornado zone. To them, I was just another problem to be dealt with quickly. They sent me back to Galapagos, where I was immediately handed over to the local authorities. My mother was furious and worried, but not really surprised. The punishment was swift. 10 weeks of house arrest. No docks, no freighters, no adventures. Just the tight metal walls of our tiny room. For a 9-year-old, it felt like an eternity. But even in confinement, I couldn't stop dreaming about the freighters and submarines. This experience should have scared me off, but in truth, it was only the beginning. I knew I would leave Galapagos one day. It was only a matter of time. Over the years, I grew older, wiser, and, as many would say, even more unbearable. By then, I was attending Galapagos Middle School, which felt more like a punishment than an achievement.
The teachers hated me, and most classmates avoided me. My sharp tongue and tendency to question every authority figure got me into trouble, but it also earned me a certain level of admiration, especially from an unexpected source. An older boy found my heated arguments with the teachers entertaining in an otherwise dull and miserable school. His name was Lucian. Lucian's father was part of a mercenary group responsible for maintaining order in Galapagos. Well, as much order as one could expect in the tornado zone.
Lucian called me a loud-mouthed asshole and a real bastard, but he liked that about me. He was fascinated by the way I tormented teachers with words, throwing them off balance without ever losing my composure. Despite our completely different backgrounds, we became friends. Lucian's home was much bigger than the tiny place my mother and I shared. His apartment had multiple rooms and was located higher up in the massive titanium structure that formed the heart of Galapagos. His father owned a private training facility where he honed his combat skills for the brutal world outside. But there was one thing in that facility that drew us in like moths to a flame: a fully operational submarine simulator. It was an impressive setup, a real submarine control panel, foot pedals, levers, buttons, and control displays, all in front of a massive screen that simulated a vast, realistic underwater landscape. Lucian's father regularly used the simulator to sharpen his navigation and combat skills, but when he wasn't around, it was ours. I still remember the first time I sat in that seat. The screen in front of me flickered, displaying the image of a massive submarine gliding through a dark, neon-lit underwater world. The controls were unfamiliar, yet the thrill was undeniable. It felt as if, for the first time, I held a small piece of freedom in my hands. Lucian and I spent almost every free moment there. He taught me how to maneuver the submarine, fire torpedoes, lay mines, and sneak through tight passages undetected. It was more than just a game. It felt like a real mission. We developed strategies, outsmarted opponents, and laughed like madmen whenever one of us blew something up. Over time, I improved significantly. I began to understand the movements, the currents, the subtle techniques required to pilot a submarine like a true master. Lucian was amazed at how quickly I learned. He even predicted that one day I'd become the best pilot Aqua had ever seen. Those hours in the simulator became my escape from the dull reality of daily life. While other kids got into fights or wasted their time on meaningless distractions, Lucian and I immersed ourselves in a world that felt bigger, more important, and infinitely more exciting. But back then, I had no idea that these games were more than just play. They were the reality that awaited us out there in the sea. Back then, I had no idea that this training would be crucial for my future. Something that would one day give me the means to survive in the world of Aqua. And one day, that moment came. At 14, my life changed forever, and not for the better. Mom did what she had to do to keep us afloat. She worked hard, but in the tornado zone, that meant nothing. The men who came and went from our home were a miserable mix of drunks, losers, and violent scum. But the one she brought home that night was worse than any before. He was a drunk, a mercenary with that typical hardened, worn-out aura. His breath reeked of cheap booze, and his bloodshot eyes gleamed beneath the filthy rim of his cap. A man who thought the world belonged to him. At first, I only heard loud talking. The walls were paper-thin, and his shouting echoed through the entire room. Then came the blows. The dull, sickening sound of fists slamming into flesh made my blood boil. I ran into the room and saw Mama on the floor. Her face was covered in blood, her eyes pleading as she looked up at me. The drunk loomed over her, still yelling, still cursing. He ordered me to leave. Mom, weak as she was, tried to push him away, screamed at him to get out, but that bastard had no sense of decency. Instead, he suddenly pulled a knife from his belt, a long, gleaming blade that glistened under the neon light. That was the moment I knew I had to act. There was no time to think, no time for fear. The struggle was chaotic. He was bigger, stronger,
but I had rage and survival instinct on my side. He swung at me, the knife flashing dangerously close to my face. I dodged, struck him with everything I had. He gasped. My hands found his face. I pressed hard against his eyes, forcing him down. A curse. Then silence. I sat there, shaking. My breath was heavy. Mom lay beside me, reaching for my hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. I knelt beside her, held her hand tight, and tried to give her whatever comfort I could. But I could see that she wasn't going to make it. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her grip weakened.
Stay strong and never give up. Y179
were her last words before she closed her eyes forever. I was alone. And I still didn't understand the meaning of Y179. What was she trying to tell me? The mercenary lay dead beside us in a growing pool of blood. He had fallen onto his own knife. I knew I had no time to lose. I searched his pockets and took everything that seemed important. He wore a small device on his wrist labeled mail printer, and in his pockets I found a pendant engraved with the word succubus. A few hundred credits were in his digital wallet. I took all his belongings and left our home, which was now nothing more than an empty shell. No tears, no looking back, only the unshakable certainty that from this moment on, I was alone, and I would have to survive in this cruel world by myself. My only refuge was my friend, Lucian. He swore to me on his life that he wouldn't tell anyone, not even his parents. Together, we inspected the mercenaries' belongings. Lucian said his father also had a mail printer and used it to distribute mission orders and boarding tickets for jump ships. But the pendant was even more intriguing. Lucian was convinced that it was the access key to a submarine. Now I knew what I had to do. I had to say goodbye to Galapagos. With a heavy heart, Lucian pulled me into one last embrace. With the submarine key in my hand and a new world waiting to be conquered, my life of adventure began. I trudged through the docks of Galapagos, shoulders hunched, eyes sharp. My footsteps echoed softly against the cold metal floor as I wove my way through the massive vessels anchored there. It was an enormous dock, home to hundreds of submarines of all sizes and shapes. The scent of salt water, machine oil, and the sharp metallic tang of rust hung heavily in the air. Finding the succubus seemed almost impossible. Countless boats were lined up tightly together, some clean and well-maintained, others in a state of complete disrepair. Some looked like they had seen their best days decades ago, while others gleamed as if they were freshly polished. I had no name, no number, only this key, which looked like a pendant. The small metal tag felt cold in my hand. Engraved in almost invisible letters was the word succubus. Two inconspicuous buttons protruded from the smooth metal surface. Beneath them, barely legible in tiny print, were some words. I squinted, straining my eyes, and finally I could make them out. Open and close. I hesitated. Could it really be that simple?
One press of a button and I would know which boat was now mine. A deep breath. There was no turning back now. My fingers tightened around the pendant and I pressed open. In the distance, I heard a faint mechanical whirring, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible beep. It was a sound I might have missed amid the constant noise of the docks if I hadn't been listening so intently. I scanned my surroundings, leapt over a few hoses, and ducked beneath waiting loading cranes. Another press of the button. The sound grew louder, and then I saw the boat. A strong, sturdy hull made of thick titanium, painted in a deep, almost unreal navy blue. The front section was coated in red, with two spear-like metal spikes protruding from either side of the bow. They gave the boat a menacing, almost ghostly appearance, as if it intended to pierce the ocean itself. The succubus had broad wings extending from its sides. At the tips of these wings were large, backward-curving extensions that seamlessly blended into the boat's form. These tips were also painted a bright, striking red. The entire design exuded a mix of elegance and deadly precision.
I couldn't see much more of the boat beneath the water, but just this sight alone made my heart race. I had never seen a boat like this in all my years here. It would have certainly caught my attention. Now, I just had to find a way inside. The boat was firmly latched to the docking station. Bracing myself, I leaped onto one of the wings and spotted a kind of ascent, handholds leading up the hull. My courage outweighed my fear and excitement. Finally, I stood atop the succubus and could already see the entry hatch. It was half open, held in place by a locking mechanism. It was heavy. Opening it was a struggle, requiring all my strength. But at last, the way inside was clear. I took one last glance over my shoulder to make sure no one was watching, then slipped inside and sealed the hatch behind me. A wheel was attached to the hatch, and instinctively I knew I had to turn it until the hatch was tightly locked. The interior of the submarine was surprisingly spacious, at least for someone like me who was used to the cramped living blocks of Galapagos. To my amazement, I could walk upright without hunching over. I let my gaze wander and began exploring the compartments.
I came across a storage room, packed with supplies, canned goods, vacuum-sealed meals, and even a bottle of compressed oxygen. Everything one would need to survive underwater for weeks. My stomach growled, but I had no time to dwell on that. In another room, I found a pile of clothing. Nothing special, just plain overalls, a few worn-out boots, and some underwear. But among them, I discovered a fine silk suit, tailored for someone with style. The clothes were far too big for me. No surprise, I was still just half a kid. Still, I set the suit aside carefully. Who knew when it might come in handy? There was a small sleeping berth with a surprisingly comfortable bed. I ran my hand over the mattress, softer than anything I had ever known. Right next to it was a tiny toilet, just big enough for necessities. Then, at the rear of the boat, I spotted another hatch. It was circular, secured with 8 handles that needed to be turned to open it. My hands trembled with excitement as I released the handles and swung the heavy door open. Behind it lay the engine room, the heart of the boat. A massive hydrogen tank took up half the space, shimmering and pristine, as if it had just been refilled. Next to it, a complex-looking propulsion system stood, its workings a complete mystery to me. I had no idea how the thing operated, and honestly, I didn't care at that moment. As long as it got the boat moving, that was all that mattered. Satisfied, I sealed the hatch and made my way back to the front of the boat. When I reached the cockpit, I was amazed once again. The hatch leading to the cockpit was also circular, with a high threshold that I could still step over comfortably. The space beyond was like something out of a dream. 3 massive monitors dominated the front, crystal clear and ready to display everything I would need for navigation. A chair on a suspension platform stood before the control panel, which was packed with countless levers, buttons, and switches, far more than I was used to from the simulator with Lucian. I dropped into the chair. My hands glided over the control buttons, feeling the cool surface of the levers. This was it. This was the succubus, my boat, my new life. I started the engine and held my breath for a moment. There was no sound, but the monitors in front of me slowly began to glow. I flinched briefly when I saw the dock and a few workers on the screen, not out of fear, but out of surprise. And then I startled as I heard a voice.
Please follow safety instructions. Automatic undocking sequence activated.
That was incredible. The boat could talk. The succubus had an onboard computer that made everything much easier. I leaned back, relaxed, and watched in fascination as the cockpit displays lit up. The monitor showed a detailed image of what lay ahead of the boat. How exactly this propulsion system worked was a mystery to me, but I didn't care. As long as the succubus moved, I was satisfied. However, I noticed something strange. I couldn't hear any engine noise. The automatic undocking process ran like clockwork. A slight jolt went through the boat as it was released from the docking clamps. The succubus moved smoothly and elegantly, gliding safely through the dock and heading toward the airlock at the end. Behind me, the heavy airlock door sealed shut with a deep thud, followed by a hissing sound as the chamber slowly filled with water.
Through the monitors, I watched as the water rose, surrounding the succubus until it was completely submerged.
Automatic undocking complete. Manual control activated.
The onboard computer announced. The boat's headlights pierced the darkness ahead, casting a cold, white light as the front airlock swung open with a heavy groan. With a gentle push on the controls, I slowly accelerated. The succubus glided forward, out into the boundless depths of the ocean. For the first time in my life, I saw Galapagos from outside. The sight took my breath away. A vast sea of lights stretched before me, a living testament to humanity's ability to build a world even in the depths of the ocean. The city lay in the South Pacific, near the Chilean coast, and was part of the so-called hot vent stations, a network of underwater settlements built around extinct volcanoes. I had learned about them once in school, but the information had never meant anything to me. Until now. Thousands of floodlights illuminated the city's surroundings in an eerie, cold blue glow. Around the circular city, towering columns of light pulsed at regular intervals, alternating between yellow and white. The effect was both cosmic and haunting. The city's architecture was awe-inspiring. Beyond the glowing pillars, massive residential blocks rose up, some reaching heights of 120 meters. Reinforced with titanium, the towering structures looked like the remnants of an ancient fortress, yet they were modern and teeming with life. Bridges connected the buildings to multiple levels, creating a vast network that linked the residents together. At the center of the city stood its largest structure, a colossal mushroom-shaped building with a cylindrical tower stretching over 40 meters into the depths. Above it, a massive dome, an architectural marvel, glowed in a glaring yellow, towering over every other structure. This was the heart of Galapagos, the seat of power and administration. Beneath the city center lay the vast dock of Galapagos, divided into multiple sections, the civilian dock for passenger and cargo ships, and the military dock for combat vessels and bombers. Thousands of submarines could be housed here at once, each dock illuminated by white lights that guided the way like landing strips. Over 20 elevators connected the docks to the residential blocks and industrial sectors. At the edge of the city's core, 4 massive factories worked around the clock, producing the chemosynthetic protein that sustained much of the population. Each of these sprawling halls, measuring over 200 square meters, never ceased their production. I remembered how, as a small boy, I had wandered through the streets of Galapagos, seeing this world from a completely different perspective. Now, from the outside, I finally grasped the full scale and significance of the city. The succubus drifted farther away, and the city lights slowly faded behind me. I was now in the vast, open expanse of the ocean. Cold water surrounded me, and the glow of the headlights danced over rocks and sand-covered seafloors. It was a feeling I would never forget. Endless freedom stretched before me. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. No more Galapagos. No more cramped streets. No more damp, suffocating apartments. No more drunken shouting in the docks. No more wondering whether tomorrow would be better or worse. Out here, everything was different. I placed my hands on the controls and looked at the monitors. The onboard computer displayed all the crucial information: water depth, position on the sea chart, and the small dots on the sonar screen, representing other boats or cargo ships. I was fascinated, savoring the moment. I maneuvered in circles through the endless blue of the ocean. The succubus responded smoothly to every movement of the control stick, and I relished the feeling of absolute control. It was as if I had been piloting this boat my entire life. Only the monitors and displays, which were far more complex than anything I had seen in the simulator with Lucian, that reminded me this was no game. Suddenly, the mail printer on my wrist vibrated. I stared at the small device I had taken from the mercenary. It flickered weakly with a faint blue glow. Before I could react, a voice came through the speakers of the succubus. But it wasn't the familiar voice of the onboard computer. This voice was different. Rough. Commanding.
and clearly meant for someone who wasn't me.
Light. Flint, what is your current position? Immediate response required. I have an urgent assignment. Reward 3,000 credits. Target coordinates will be transmitted upon confirmation.
I sat frozen, my hands gripping the control stick tightly. The voice had said the name Flint. That must have been the dead mercenary to whom the succubus originally belonged, which meant this assignment was definitely not meant for me. But 3,000 credits! My heart pounded. I had no idea what this job entailed, but that amount was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I didn't know who the voice belonged to, nor what the mission was, but just the thought of getting my hands on that much money made me sit up and listen. I looked down at the mail printer on my wrist, as if it could give me answers, but of course, nothing came. Only the blinking light and the eerily unsettling voice echoing through the cockpit.
Flint, report immediately.
For a moment, I hesitated. Should I respond? I had no idea how to react to such requests. Besides, I had no desire to get caught in a web I couldn't untangle due to some mistake. But one thing I knew, this mission was an opportunity, maybe even a ticket into a world I had never dared to enter. My gaze wandered to the control console of the succubus. Before me lay the open ocean, endless freedom, a life full of adventure. But then there was this voice, and what it offered sounded irresistible. This was my moment. I had to decide. I briefly considered whether to seize the opportunity or ignore it, but my instincts told me I had to play along. I wanted to find out more about Aqua, how things worked here. I reached for the succubus communication system and lowered my voice as much as possible, making it sound rough and deep. Send me the coordinates for the mission. For a moment, there was silence. My heart pounded in my throat. Would they notice I wasn't who they thought I was? But then, the answer came.
Aye, you'll get the coordinates on your mail printer.
I leaned back, listening to the voice and trying to control my nervousness. It sounded like a typical mercenary job. A cargo ship loaded with gold was set to cross the Easter Islands on its way to the Shogunate in the Western Pacific. The objective was clear: intercept the freighter and seize the valuable cargo. The mail printer vibrated on my wrist. Then a coordinate display appeared on the small screen. Oh God, I had no idea what to do with it. It showed something about degrees east and degrees south. What did that even mean? There was no way I could ask that voice, as I was sure there was a code I simply had to decipher. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Under no circumstances could I be discovered. Who was Lefebvre? I was not a trained mercenary, and my only weapon was the courage that had somehow kept me alive so far. But the fact that I was sitting in the succubus, one of the most impressive boats I had ever seen, gave me a little sense of security. I just had to figure out how to understand these coordinates. I looked at the succubus navigation display, trying to make sense of it. Then, suddenly, it hit me like a revelation. The position display actually used the same, previously incomprehensible coordinate language. A number was followed by an S, and another number was followed by a W. Slowly, I began to understand. S must mean south, and W stood for west. The numbers had to indicate a position south of the equator and west of the prime meridian. Sometimes going to school actually turned out to be useful. Now I at least knew where the target was, but I still had no clue how to navigate there. Then I discovered a feature of the boat. It read autopilot, and underneath were the letters that had confused me before: N, E, S, and W. Now all I had to do was enter the numbers into the corresponding letters using the numerical keypad on the display. This could be my lucky break. So I entered the exact coordinates as they appeared on the mail printer display: 27 degrees, 16 minutes, 14.4 seconds S, and 10 degrees, 13 minutes, 34.8 seconds W. Suddenly, the onboard computer confirmed the target. Seconds later, the boat started moving.
turned, and noticeably accelerated to cruising speed. I remained seated for a while, watching the surroundings on the monitor. If I understood the display correctly, my journey would take more than 4 hours. It felt like a dream. My stomach growled, and I knew I had to prepare. Never start a mission on an empty stomach. The storage room was well stocked, and I didn't hesitate to help myself generously. I grabbed everything I could and enjoyed my first proper meal in days. I knew I needed to stay focused, but with a full stomach, the situation felt easier to handle. A little rest wouldn't hurt either, and given the travel time, a short nap after a big meal seemed like a good idea. Refreshed and strengthened, nothing could stand in the way of my first adventure. A signal tone pulled me back into the cockpit. The succubus had reached the rendezvous point. The autopilot was automatically deactivated, and the onboard computer announced that manual control was now available. Through the large monitors, I saw lights in the distance, other boats. At least 5, maybe 6, different in size, but each one looked combat-ready. The sonar screen was filled with signals. Just like in the simulation, the dots on the sonar represented ships. The closer I got, the larger they became. A buzzing sound broke the silence.
Light, Flint.
A voice greeted me through the speakers. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed the communication button and responded with the same greeting. Light. No one seemed suspicious, even though I didn't know any of the others. The boats slowly formed up, with more arriving from the south and west. I took a deep breath. The others seemed familiar with one another, while I remained the hidden outsider. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I was determined to give it my all and emerge with my new life intact.